All right, so we are in Matthew 6, starting again in verse 19. If you weren't with us last week, a few people were out camping. There's a big swath of people. But we focused in on the first part of this verse where Jesus talks about where to store treasure. He tells us, don't store up for yourselves treasures here on earth where moth and rust destroy, where things are temporary. And so we talked a lot about how everything we have, all of our stuff, houses, cars, wealth, possessions, anything we have, and us ourselves too, are passing away. Really quickly. It may not seem that fast now, but the older you get, the faster the speed goes. And Jesus says this is not really what you want to pour all your time and your energy to. He kind of puts up two options. You could do that. You could store it here on earth, but ultimately all of that is just washing and wasting away. And he says instead what you want to do is store up treasures in heaven with God, where things are eternal, where things don't fade, where you're not wasting your time, where you're not wasting your energy and even your money, your stuff, but invest in eternal things. Use that stuff that God's given you for the good of others to worship Him and make eternal deposits. We talked about making little deposits every day, just trying to wake up and make a heavenly deposit. Store up a treasure for yourself in heaven. And we've seen that in the Sermon on the Mount. God sees what we do. We've talked through the acts of righteousness that Jesus lists, from giving, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Let the Father see it. And you're fasting, don't let others notice that you're fasting. Let the Father who sees what's done in secret reward you in secret. In your prayer, go in and close the door and pray to your Father who's unseen, and He sees what's done and rewards you. And those rewards are from love and gratitude toward God. They're treasures stored up in heaven. And so I want to encourage us all in that. I hope this week you've been making some heavenly deposits, regardless of their size, and that we keep on this. We want to be intentional and careful. We want to look at our week and make sure what we do through the week is not simply storing up things here and investing in things that are temporary and passing away. And that can come in many forms. Love and service to others is storing up treasures in heaven. Obviously, acts of faith, acts of righteousness, prayer, giving, fasting is storing up treasure in heaven. Helping those who can't help themselves. Helping those who offer you no advantage in helping, even if it's difficult. You're storing up treasures in heaven. Putting down your phone, taking more time for the Lord. There's all kinds of ways to love God with the things we do. But today I want to revisit this passage. And this time I'm going to focus a little bit more in the second section. We stayed very much in this first part here, but today we're going to hone in the second paragraph. So let's read together starting in verse 19. Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Now again, in the first part, Jesus is teaching us where we should put our treasure, but there's a slight change that happens in verse 21. I wonder if you noticed that. Where he shifts from language about your treasure to language about your heart. He moves things around. First he's talking about where should you store your treasure. And then he says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He moves from treasure to heart. And what we normally say about this verse, we should say again. You notice it's not Jesus saying where your heart is, that's where your treasure will be. That would make sense. But Jesus is doing something different. I mean, yeah, commonsensically, yes. The things you love, you would expect that you pour money into, right? And so if I wanted to kind of gauge what you spend your money on, if I wanted to guess on your weekly budget, or better, because there's a bunch of y'all and one of me, if you want to guess on my weekly budget, if you want to figure out, you might look at the things I love, and you could probably assume I spend some things on, basic needs and family and necessities and chips and salsa. I buy a lot of chips and salsa. A lot of my treasure is invested in chips and salsa because I love chips and salsa. It used to be ice cream, but I'm 42, so it's chips and salsa. Beyond that, though, I'm boring enough, in spite of what our college young adult class found out today, I'm boring enough, it'd be hard to pin me down on much else. I don't golf. What I do cannot be called golfing. I don't really like to travel. My wife does. Eventually, she's going to take me on the road, but for now, I'm pretty content with where I am, so I'm not spending money on that. I like cars, but not enough to spend any time or money or energy on cars. So you might have trouble kind of pinning me down in this situation, but that's ultimately not what Jesus is saying. He's not saying what I love is where my money or my treasure will go. That's the important interpretive thing to realize with this passage that we often go over is what Jesus says. He's not saying what you care about. Where your heart is, that's where your treasure will be. That's true to a degree. He's saying where your treasure is, where you store things up, that's where your heart will be. He's kind of flipped the script just slightly, but significantly. Wherever your time and your money and your energy, wherever you store your treasure, that's where you will find your heart. That's what you're going to care about because your heart follows your treasure. Your heart follows your focus. In one interpretation, Jesus is talking about the movement of treasure, but if you really look at it, he's not talking that way. He's not saying that if I care about fajitas, my money will go to fajitas, which you could pin me down on that one. That works. But he's saying where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. He's talking about movement of the heart. I think sometimes we think the things we love and care about are pretty static, like those are going to stay the same, and that dictates where your treasure goes, where your money, your time, your energy, the things you invest, but that's not really what Jesus is saying. He's saying if your heart, or that your heart will actually move based on where you put your treasure. Your love, your focus, what you care about, your heart will move based on where you put your time, money, and energy. And so if you are pouring your time and your energy and your money into earthly things, no matter the reason, that's where your heart will go. It's why when, if a married couple is in trouble and they come to a counselor, the counselor might ask them, okay, tell me about yourselves and your schedule, and tell me what's important to you. And I heard a counselor talking about this one time, and he said he had a couple come in, and he asked the husband, okay, what's most important to you? How important is this marriage? He said, it's the most important thing in my life. He said, okay, tell me about your schedule. And the husband went on to list all the ways that he's investing in things that are not his marriage. Investing his time in his physical fitness. And he was a collegiate athlete. And so he spent a lot of time playing pickup games and different other things during the week. That's where your energy goes, your time goes, your focus goes, that tells where your heart will be. If the person comes and says, well, I work constantly and I play golf, but my marriage is the most important thing to me, either they're lying or Jesus is. I'm pretty sure it's them. That stuff dictates where your heart goes. It is where your treasure is, if it's in your job or in your fitness. If you're playing video games all the time, but you say it's other things that are most important, where your treasure is, your heart migrates. It's drawn to those things. I saw this in myself recently. Not in fitness or sports, obviously, but with our recent house renovation. If I'm really honest, I try to be honest up here without oversharing. I probably overshare sometimes, that's okay. I understand a house is just a house. It's meant to live in, it's meant to stay in. But renovating a house is a whole nother story. And even though I wasn't doing the work, I got stressed out by the whole situation. I wasn't there, I couldn't keep eyes on it. Certainly a lot of money was going out. A lot of time was going by, a ton of energy and a ton of stress. And what I saw was, even though I'm aware it's just a house, even though I'm aware it has a purpose, it's temporary, it's passing and fading, even though I prayed, I read, my heart is still drawn to the thing that has my attention. It has my focus. And so for a while, that's where my treasure was. My heart was moved that direction to this temporary, passing, fading thing of this earth. And I struggled with frustration, being discontent. Like I said, I know it's just a place. I'm very aware of what it is. And in spite of that awareness, the things of this world can move your heart. Our heart follows our treasure. Jesus talks about this in other places. If you remember the parable of the sower and the seed, Jesus talks about a farmer who went out and sowed seed, and how the seed produced, how fruitful it was, depended on the type of soil. And you have this one section where Jesus says, the one who received the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, choke it, making it unfruitful. The deceitfulness of wealth, the worries of the world choke out your faith because your heart follows your treasure. Jesus, I think, is saying if you store stuff up here and in this life, on this earth, if you invest all your time, your energy, and your money into earthly things, your heart will come to love earthly things. You'll draw your heart to this world. You'll be a person of the world more and more. And if you want to know where your heart is, Jesus gives us a way. If you want an honest evaluation, you want to say, okay, God, tell me, reveal to me where my heart is. All Jesus is saying is look into this mirror. Look into where your treasure is. You look at your time. Look at your budget. Look at where your effort and your energy go and what dominates your thinking during the week. What do you sacrifice for? What do you invest in? What do you take risks for? If you kind of think about that and look into the shiny reflection, the mirror of your treasure, Jesus says that's where you'll find your heart. It's a spiritual mirror that can be painfully honest. He's inviting us to honestly look at our lives, and he goes a little bit deeper. And he kind of assess this situation in verse 22. Kind of continues in this line of thought. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And this one's a little trickier. Because the eye, the lamp of the body, it's kind of a complicated metaphor, isn't it? I think we can safely say he's not talking about physical eyesight. There are plenty of people who struggle with their physical eyesight. They'd make better spiritual guides than many of us who have good eyesight. The eye is the lamp of the body. You'd certainly read it like other passages, that the things that we take in determine kind of how our spiritual health will go. There's truth there, that what you take in, where your eyes go, it's that garbage in, garbage out idea, that what you fill your mind, your heart with, what your eyes take in, will influence your heart. I really think that's what Jesus is talking about back in chapter 5. When he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's true. What you take in, what you see, what you listen to, how you spend your time influences your heart. And we need to remember that and take it seriously. And I don't know about you. Anybody have an iPhone in here? Okay. If you have an iPhone, then your treasure is clearly here on this earth. No, that's not what I'm getting at. Anybody get screen time reminders? Sunday mornings, 9:07, 9:13 a.m. Every single week in Bible class, my screen time reminder goes off. And I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure yet if that's God telling me, hey, you teach and you pray and you study, but are you giving 3 hours a day to it? Or if that's just Apple trying to interrupt Bible class. I'm not sure which one it is. But either way, Paul asks the question, what are we seeing? What's coming through that device? Is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Admirable? Excellent? Praiseworthy? Or is it something else? And that would be a good thing to take away from this passage. And certainly Jesus says this over and over. Paul here reinforces it. The things we take in influence our heart. But I think what Jesus means here, the most contextually honest thing, he starts with treasure. He ends with you cannot serve both God and money. Jesus is talking about wealth and materialism. He's been talking about where to store your treasures, not here on earth, but in heaven. He says where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. You can't serve two masters. You'll hate the one and love the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And the context of this section is about that dynamic. Who are you going to serve? Will your treasure be stored up in heaven for God? Will you be rich toward God? Or will you store it up for yourself and serve mammon? Will you build bigger barns and be rich toward yourself but stingy toward others? He talks about the eye being the lamp of the body. Is it focused on the eternal things? Or is it focused on the things of this earth? Is it focused on the will of the Father or the will of me? Because that tells you if your body will be full of light. Jesus says, store up treasure in heaven. Are we doing that, or do we have the eye of envy and jealousy? Are we content with God's given us? Or are we unsettled and jealous of what others have? And this is probably where the social media part of the sermon would come in, right? I'm not big on social media, but that stuff exalts the earthly. It is about beauty and wealth and status and power. It is stuff that's passing away and fading. Those are the thorns. Those are the things in the parable, the deceitfulness of wealth, the desires of this world that choke the life out of us and make us unfruitful. The eye is the lamp of the body. He's saying if your eye is good, focused on the things of God, then your life will be full of light. If you take in those good things, if you focus on eternal truth, you store up treasure in heaven, then you'll be satisfied in God. You'll be content and trusting. You'll be generous to those who are in need and not stingy. You'll be rich toward God. And most importantly, our heart will be where our treasure is. If you store up treasure in heaven, your heart is drawn there. If your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness, and great is that darkness. Here on earth, you cannot serve two masters. They are opposed to each other. That's not a popular message today. Not in our world where we are historically the richest and greatest country of all time. We really want to have our big pile of earthly treasure and a big pile of heavenly treasure, don't we? We're tempted all the time to serve both God and money, and Jesus says you can't. You have to choose one. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If your treasure's here, your heart will be drawn here. Your life will be filled with darkness. And in that case, the opposite is also true. If you pour your time and your money and your energy into eternal things, you spend your time, you store your treasure in heaven, your heart will be drawn toward heaven. Jesus is warning us about earthly focus, but he's also teaching us a way to move our hearts toward heaven. If we set our sights, our eye, if we fixate and focus on things above, we store up for ourselves treasures in heaven, then our hearts will follow. And that is something. That's really something. That's something practical and realistic that Jesus says, hey, if you want to grow closer to God, if you want to be drawn more to his will, towards him, if you want your heart to be closer to him, invest your time, energy, and money into eternal things. Store your treasures in heaven, not on earth. If we spend our effort and our energy there, even our money, money can do a lot of things to us. It can corrupt easily. It can take over. It can become an idol. It can cause anxiety. But if handled properly, I think Jesus is saying if you spend your money and you invest for the kingdom of heaven, your heart will be drawn towards heaven. So instead of your heart being trapped here among the thorns and the thick of this life and deceitfulness of the lies that the world tells, your heart will follow your treasure. If we use treasure for God, our hearts are drawn toward God. I really like this graphic, so I used it. See her heart being drawn upward. It makes sense. You kind of see it in other ways, a lot of other ways. You can see it in all kinds of things. There's a group of us here that play fantasy football together, it's kind of funny. It's a unique league. I've played fantasy football for years, but Charlie's the commissioner, and Charlie's into the weeds. He's very detailed. And so I never thought I would care so much about what an individual defensive player did. I played football in high school. I was not counting tackles or half tackles, assisted tackles, but in this league, you do. It's funny how spending time on fantasy football can draw your heart more towards football. Now, granted, I like football. I'm already there. My older brother, though, he hates football. He never watched football, but for a couple of years, he played fantasy football with us. He spent time playing this game of the sport he couldn't care less about. He was drawn into the sport because of the time and the energy and the focus he was putting into it. It's interesting, it's fascinating how in so many ways, how we spend our treasure, how we store it, draws us in. For people who bet on sports. You think you're a sports fan before you put some money on the line, now you're really a sports fan. If you contribute to political campaigns, maybe you liked your candidate before that, but now you're invested, right? Now you've got some money into it. Drawn more into the things that we pour into, and to that Jesus says, don't pour into earthly things. And for my part, I like to think of fantasy football as a heavenly thing. Depends on the season. I got to tell you, this season so far so good, but I got to play Royce today. That's a problem. It's fellowship between Christian brothers and sister, because Teresa's in the league and she's pretty good. And yet Jesus says, don't focus your treasure here. Your time, your money, your energy, your passion. If we choose to store treasure in heaven, if we choose to look at our schedule and remake and refashion it in a way we're storing up treasures in heaven, it draws our heart towards God. And then we can have this relationship where our treasures draw our hearts toward God, and it helps us avoid the thorns of life. We focus more on the eternal. It's this positive connection between the two. Your treasures drawing you towards God, and God's remaking your heart to store up even more into heaven. It's a positive cycle. Those of us who believe, we follow Jesus, we seek His kingdom, but every once in a while we get distracted by the things here. I think what Jesus is telling us is if we want to do an assessment, we should look at where our treasure goes. And so today, what does your week look like? If you mapped it out, if you looked at your weekly schedule, where does all your time, energy, passion, focus, and money go? Where are we storing our treasure? Is it in the passing things of this life all the time? Is it in the world, or are we giving cups of water in Jesus' name? Are we doing little things, making small heavenly deposits where moth and rust cannot destroy? Are we giving generously and quietly, trusting that the Lord who sees us will reward us? That's what this is about. It's living life to glorify Him. Are we helping those less fortunate? Are we serving with our time and energy, not just here at church, but everywhere we go? When we go to work, are we working for the King, or are we working for our boss? What are we doing? Are we praying? Are we spending limited time off of our phones and in His presence? Matthew 5, Jesus says, are we persecuted? Are we willing to endure persecution for the sake of Jesus and the gospel, so we could be drawn toward heaven enough that we want to share Him with others no matter what the consequences would be? And for my part, what I want to do, the house is a house. It's settled. There's still wires sticking out some parts of the wall. We're hosting care group today. You can come over and you can see it. That's what a house is for. It's a thing of this world. It's to be used for heavenly purpose. Maybe you have a home you can host and you can lift people up. You share the things that you have with those who are less fortunate. And to be rich toward God in a new way. I want to encourage you in that. Look at your schedule. Look at how you spend your time, and try to think of something this week that you can be rich toward God in. You could store up a new treasure in heaven that you've never done before. And in doing that, God will draw our hearts even more towards Him. And that's our prayer. That we'd, in quiet, serve the King in every way. That we'd act out righteousness in faith so that the Lord sees and rewards us in heaven, that He be pleased. Now let's pray as we close. Father, we praise You. We lift You up and thank You for all the ways You've blessed us. We glorify You and worship You for all You've done. Thank You for Your mercy, for Your unfailing love and Your patience with us, for Jesus. And we ask You again, Lord, to forgive us, because we fall short here all the time, every day. We know we do. We know we don't deserve Your Son. And there are so many things here that capture our attention and draw us and draw our hearts away from You. And Lord, this morning we ask for strength, that You would bless us and help us, that as we go back into the world, as we go back to work, back to school, to phones, to distractions, to traffic, Lord, help us to look to heaven, to remember that we're Yours, to remember where our life and our home is. And Father, please help us to store up treasures there with You, not here. To serve You better, to love You, to love others. Lord, help us to do Your will. As a church, help us to reach out with the gospel. Help us to hold to the truth, to proclaim it for those who need it. And Lord, please give us strength and guide us. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. This morning, if you've never responded to the gospel, maybe you've heard what Jesus did for you, but you've never kind of made that real move towards Him, you could do that today. If that's on your heart, you could stand up, you can confess your faith, you can state your belief in Jesus, you can repent and turn from your ways to His, you can be buried, die to your old self, and be risen to new life. We would love to be a part of that today. If you're not quite there, if you have questions, we'd love to talk. I'm happy to talk. Tom's here. We've got a seasoned minister here. We've got 6 elders running around and a bunch of godly people. Just ask. We'd love to help you in any way we can along your journey. But if this morning you need to make a response, do it today. If you need a church family to walk with, this is a good one. We'd love to encourage you and help you along the way and have you help us. But if there's anything you need to do this morning before you leave, please come as we stand and we sing together.